Hmm. So I want to comment on this concept of nurturing communities. I think it's fair to say that that what happens within the ayahuasca ceremony is not necessarily reflective of what a person's life is like outside of that ceremony, right? That I can go to an ayahuasca circle and I can have a certain dynamic of interactions, and okay, totally the whole conflict thing, the elephant in the room concept. Let's just put that totally aside for a second. If I show up to an ayahuasca circle, I'm going to build an intimate relationship with those people because of having shared that experience with them. And it's fair to assume that for most people, they're going to come home and what they've learned and discovered with those people, as well as in general about themselves, about their lives, about the culture that they live in, is not necessarily going to be shared with those around them. And that can result in it could result in those things being hidden, occulted from people's lives and being shared with others, or it could just in generally just create quite a struggle in the integration process, right? So then bringing back in the elephant in the room, bringing back in the actual context in which these ayahuasca ceremonies are happening, I think it's probably fair to assume that a lot of these people are coming home from those experiences and having this wide opening, this healing, this conflict resolution, this sort of like maybe accessing their anger and the resistance in a positive way, all of these great experiences, but then stepping back into a narrative space, a cultural identity space, a cultural space that is still antithetical to what they stepped into, while also still being the lived reality of the actual power imbalance, violence, and they're going back into that space and attempting to integrate. So I would love your comments on that. Oh, Antwan, you're muted. Sorry.
Again, this is not something new because this is again what is the experience of civil society in joint space for the last 25 years in civil society work for peace. Because again, people coming to meeting each other and just being sent back home without support, without integration processes, without communities that hold them as they go through this when they're home is what we've missed in the bigger image of peacemaking in this land for the last 25 years. If you ask me as an activist, this is the where we have been the weakest in for the last 25 years. So this is not different also from this space. That's why the people we've interviewed, some of them had that kind of support when they went back home. They had people from within their own community who were able to hold them within this process of integration after, and have space to reflect of what is that awe of that moment with the other in that joint space means in day-to-day life. So yes, some were lucky to have that, but not everyone. And that's what we noticed. And that's why I'm saying it's a responsibility after witnessing all of that to just say it's a responsibility for me as a Palestinian to say we need to have a talk as Palestinians, because if we're gonna go continue going to those spaces, then we need to make sure that there are people who are going to support those people. At least as a person who's active in this joint element space, that is not necessarily again only related to medicine. Our wish is that this becomes a normalized medicine practice globally where communities can do that without shame. In our community right now, it's something under the ground. So I personally know that many are putting a tremendous effort into building this continually underground community that can hold people. But is it something that we have on a large scale right now? No, it's not. And again, this again comes down to integration of people after psychedelics, whether it's joint or not joint. Even with people of your own people, you always need integration of what this means in your life.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to add on the groups that we researched, that many of them it's not a retreat, so they are drinking each other on a constant basis. There are active communities, And as they drink more, they become more of a strong, tribe or family or community. Some once a year, some more than that. But there's definitely this kind of intention of creating a dynamic community that's changing, that's becoming closer together, that's supporting each other, developing responsibility for each other. But then again, the reality outside is challenging. One of the Palestinian interviewees said, I cannot go back home to a checkpoint and say, I'm a spiritual light being, let me go through,
Right,
or I cannot heal trauma because trauma is ongoing. It's not like post-traumatic. It's like a continuous, complex living in trauma, So what you can do is maybe heal some of it, but it can give you energy for a while, but it will repeat because it's still happening. And I guess these are the tensions, So many of the groups we investigated, because of that tension, they also can become closer. And quite sometimes even closed, there's this potential because the outside world doesn't necessarily understands them, but they very much understand each other, So strong friendships are created that not necessarily transferred to the outside world. And almost everybody that we interviewed has this kind of plan B in life, to move to Portugal or move to Costa Rica, It's kind of like they enjoy so much like the unity, the oneness, the apolitical tension peeled from identities, and then like the tension of actually living a reality with these identities, with these such separation can be actually challenging. And so there's also sometimes people just want to drop out and leave the kind of political reality because of that. But it's a complex one. It's a complex question, and in the end, it's as the practice is more legitimized, it's easier to create communities outside of the practice that support each other, and that people can return home and they can find the like-minded people, or even better, the community becomes a stronger community and not just something you retreat to from your daily life.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about sort of from a point of how I can relate to someone not living in this kind of reality, that type of contrast of stepping out of those experiences into a different cultural space would be something akin to learning the value of and the beauty and the importance of being able to be fully in grief, and to let yourself be moved by grief and cry and hurt, and weep and love, and then going into a place where at a moment when that grief is most alive and deeply, fully, it's right and good to feel this and to be crushed by it, to be around a bunch of people who, in their mind, the most important thing to help you is to make sure they can make the symptoms of that grief go away. Where talking about things that are deeply moved by grief or sadness or death, are now sort of, they're taboo, they're not allowed, they're judged, or you might be ill if you're feeling too much grief for too long, and how profoundly isolating that can feel. And I wonder now, this is just me wondering aloud about the dynamic between, being in sort of plugging back into the matrix, like Cypher wanted to get plugged back into the matrix, which is there was the distress of living in the narrative, and now there's the narrative formed around the very real conflict, the very real violence, and now there's the distress of still living in the very real violence, the very real conflict, but now you're isolated and separated from the communitas that identifying with that cultural narrative, be it informed of hate and violence, that communitas is now lost. And so the lived reality of it is all there, but now there's also the pain of isolation. Is that something that any of your participants spoke to or you would like to speak to?